This is when I tell jokes. I'm gonna tell terrible, terrible, terrible jokes, so that you're just groaning, and then after the silence, then I will start speaking on what I'm actually here to speak about. So, all right, you don't want to hear my jokes. That's what I'm getting here. I think that's a wise choice. Welcome everybody to DC. Welcome back. Happy Veterans Day. I'm so glad you're here. This is quite an event, and there's a lot going on. So we've got some good news out there. Of course, our friends and neighbors up in Canada pulled off quite the upset. It was announced that the default policy for provinces who don't issue their own plan to comply with the target of 50 Canadian dollars by, I think it was 2022, a form of carbon fee and dividend would be the backstop, the federal government backstop. That's a huge win for our Canadian friends and neighbors, so again, a big hand for them. We've also got the Ipcc report, and this is mixed news. I don't think that we could really call that good news, but I also don't think we can say we're really that surprised that it's that bad, that an organization as conservative as the Ipcc is. It turns out that as we learn more, it's worse than we thought. That makes sense. But most importantly, and I think this is where the good news does come in, there was a ringing endorsement from the scientific community for carbon pricing. That came out loud and clear. They don't like to talk about policies, but they talked about that, and that is the best first step. And we're going to be hearing more this evening from Rick Knight, one of our research coordinators, about that. And the other thing I want to highlight is just how much this organization has grown. Mark pointed out that if you go back to 2010, the first CCL conference, there were 24 people who were in DC. And I think if you look at the people in this room, this is more than were in the entire organization at that time. And so that's phenomenal growth. And I think that it has a lot of bearing on what I'm going to talk about in terms of the election. That's coming up next. I'm going to talk about the election and what it means for us. It has a lot to do with how we're orienting ourselves for our ask. After the election, we'll talk about our ask, make climate a bridge issue, not a wedge issue. And then there's going to be time for questions after that. After that, I'm going to talk about the June analysis, how to use that in your meetings. There'll be more time for questions. In the remainder of the day, what we're going to be hearing from, we're going to be hearing about how to get to the Hill, just the logistics. How do you end up where you need to be? How do you file your meeting reports? We're then going to have a session. Madeline Parra is going to lead us in how to listen. On the Hill, knowledge is power. If you don't listen, you can't gain knowledge, and you forego power. So it's always good. We can always learn to listen better, because that's what makes us effective. That is the currency of the Hill, and so our ability to listen is going to determine how well we can exercise that power. We're going to have a break, and then we're going to have a panel of journalists before dinner. I think this will be really interesting for an organization who is as focused on the media as CCL is. For all of you who write letters to the editor, op-eds, you talk to editorial boards, I think they'll have a perspective you find interesting and useful. And then after dinner, we come back for that look at the Ipcc report, and I'm going to go over the green sheet and the pink sheet in your folders, and we're going to have some closing thoughts. So from there, let's go ahead and talk about the election. So first of all, what just happened? Well, Democrats took the House. There are still 10 seats that are undecided, but with those, accounting for those 10 seats, the Democrats have 227 seats, and 218 were needed for control. Republicans are appear set to have increased their advantage in the Senate. At a minimum, they will retain their current advantage. They already have 51 seats locked down. There are 3 seats which are still not decided. So this is going to be really a fundamentally different politics in which CCL finds itself. Going back to that first conference when we had 24 people in DC, that was the last time that Democrats held the House. And so in that time, I would say that CCL has matured as an organization. But this will be the first time, since we've matured, that we're dealing with a Democratic House. And there are going to be a lot of opportunities with that. There are also going to be a lot of opportunities to slip up. There's a lot of challenges that we're going to face. And so let me break down how we're looking in the DC office at both the House and the Senate. I'm going to begin with the caucus. So the Climate Solutions Caucus is going to finish this year with 45 Republicans, 45 Democrats. I looked it up. That's about 10 more Republicans that are on the Freedom Caucus. So we finished this out having more Republicans on the Climate Solutions Caucus than on the Freedom Caucus. And this is important. Mark Sanford was a member of both the Freedom Caucus and the Climate Solutions Caucus. So I highlight that as an example of a caucus that people know about, but not to say or imply in any way that it is impossible to have a Republican member who's a member of both. So where we are now, it looks like at least 20 Republicans on the caucus are coming back. And the way I like to frame this is, as you may know, my background is in climate science, and I had it drilled into my head that you need really long timescales to determine trends, and you have to be very aware of sources of noise in your data. And so when I look at the election, unfortunately, we don't have a long timescale with the Climate Solutions Caucus. It has only been around for 2.5 years. But the relevant point of comparison for where we are now is right after the last election. It's not the day before this election, it's the day after the last election. And the day after the last election, we had 10 Republicans going in. There were 6 Republicans still on the caucus going out. Now we have at least 20 Republicans. So we have more than 3 times the number of Republicans who are coming back after this election than we did last time. These are Republicans who survived their primaries. They survived a blue wave. These are climate Republicans who are here to stay. They're not going anywhere. So, do we want the caucus to do more? Yes. Are we going to be looking for opportunities to encourage them to do more? Yes. Are we thrilled with what they've accomplished so far? Yes. So the caucus is going to remain an important part of CCL's strategy, trying to send elite cues, both to Democrats and Republicans, that climate change is real, humans have an impact, and Congress should do something about it, and also that respectful dialogue between people who disagree with each other is essential for the proper functioning of a democracy. That's what the caucus is about. So let's talk about those opportunities and those challenges. So again, first time Democrats have held the House since 2010. This means that Democrats are going to be in the leadership. They're going to be setting the agenda. They're going to have the chairmanships. Now, one of our supporting asks for many years has been ask the chairman of this committee or that committee to hold hearings. I think that all of a sudden we're going to have a much more receptive audience for that. And so this is a great opportunity. This is going to be an opportunity for Republicans who are also on the caucus, who are also on those committees, to send elite cues to talk about climate as something that is real, something that humans have caused, and something that Congress needs to do something about. And we're going to be relying on you, their constituents, to make them aware of these opportunities and to ask them to make the pro-climate speech, to take the pro-climate vote, to support the pro-climate bill. But there are also hazards. And so the hazards with Democrats being there is that they do the opposite of what we're asking. They make climate a wedge issue, not a bridge issue. That's a big hazard. And they could use hearings if they want to talk about things that are really difficult for any Republican to get on board with, and to force Republicans who do want to say something good about climate to say only negative about things. They're going to force our public discourse into a space where it's been for the last 30 years, where we have very well-worn sides. The argument has been happening. Everybody knows how that argument works out. That argument leads to stalemate. Stalemate is victory for climate deniers. We cannot accept stalemate. We need to have discussion. We need to move forward. That means making this a bridge issue, not a wedge issue. So let's talk a little bit about the Senate. So we're still looking at 60 votes. We still need to get to 60 votes in the Senate. So let's say that we have 51 votes, it stays where it is right now. We would still need 11 Republicans to want to vote for carbon fee and dividend. And beyond that, we would need to have the vote scheduled in the first place. That would mean that the committee chairman of at least Finance Committee would need to work it through the committee, and Mitch McConnell, who will be the majority leader of the Senate, would need to schedule it for a vote. So I think that the Senate we need to manage our expectations a little bit, but we also need to keep our eyes set on that very high bar of getting to at least 60 votes. We can aim high and we can miss high. If we can figure out a way to get it without 60 votes, great, we'll take it. But if we're not aiming high and thinking that we need to do nothing short of changing the hearts and minds of the Republican base on climate, of sucking the poison out of this issue, about making this an issue where there's some gray. Gray is where deals happen. Black and white, somebody walks into the room, you know what they think, there's no room for a deal there, you're not going to get anything passed. That leads to government that does not function. And so I want us to bear that in mind, bear in mind the large task that rests in front of us. And so that's what we're looking at, and that's what we're going to need to keep in mind. And so that leads us to this one-page ask. And so this one-page ask has 3 parts. There's the first part, which is the ask and why it's beneficial. There's the supporting asks, which are those bullet points, and then there's the closing argument, which is a story of success. And so I'm going to walk you through this and why it is constructed in this way. So that first section, make the climate a bridge, not a wedge issue. So that's the ask. And here's what we're saying. Americans do not lack for topics that wedge us apart. These days, it's harder to name topics that unite us. This is too bad, because strong majorities of Americans, and here on the screen you'll see that I have the actual percentage and I have the number. That is not in your one-page handout because I think that it clutters things up, but I want you to know, as ever, CCL did our research. All these claims we have backed up, and you have the sources right there. So I want you to feel good saying these are things, we're not just saying this to say it, we're saying this because this is what the research shows. Strong majorities of Americans say they want elected officials to cooperate across political lines, to be respectful of each other, and to compromise. Bipartisan legislators see real boosts to their reputations from such behavior, as they are perceived as listening to voters and less self-interested. Further, opposite party voters like a legislator better when she or he bridges the partisan divide. So like I said, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make the case. We're trying to make this easy for them. There's so many topics that divide the parties. And this language, bridge and wedge, those words were chosen carefully because a wedge issue is something that politicians think obsessively about. This word wedge is in their heads from the primary through the general. They're thinking about wedge issues to distinguish themselves from other members of their own party and members of the opposite party. So these are words that have deep resonance with members of Congress, and so we're using their language here. And so we want them to, right, and so they also want to get reelected, and so we're saying there are plenty of things, plenty of wedge issues, this is too important. This issue is something that you can achieve these real gains, these real benefits to bipartisanship that are going to help you get reelected. There's a real benefit to doing this. Let's keep climate in that space. And so it's time politicians start treating climate as a bridge issue. There are real political benefits to be gained. As I just said, you can tell who wrote this, and I don't want to see my face anymore. Why is this happening? All right, let's see here. All right, thank you. There are real political benefits to be gained, and the physics of the climate, graphically highlighted in the recent special report on a 1.5 degree target from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, make clear that it's time to act. And in case you were wondering if graphically highlighted was deliberate, yes, it was. I'm a total dork. You should know this by now. We have some suggestions for how you could demonstrate a commitment to making climate an issue that bridges the divide in our public. And so this is the transition. This is where we do our supporting asks. And so as you know, we have this concept, primary asks, supporting asks. We are taking our supporting asks and we're putting the most salient ones, the ones that we think will move this towards being a bridge issue the most, right here in the one-page leave behind. Okay. All right, so the first one, introduce or support bipartisan fee and dividend legislation. The Ipcc report recently affirmed that pricing carbon is the best first step to addressing the problem. This in mind, I have in mind those Democrats who are now leading committee chairmanships. And so with the Ipcc report recently affirming that pricing carbon is the best first step to addressing the problem, I really want to emphasize that the scientific community has really weighed in that carbon pricing is the best first step. Now, we are still on bipartisan. We want a bipartisan introduction. And so we're putting it on the Democrats. We, your constituents, expect. If you're going to do this, if you're going to follow what the scientists say, it needs to be bipartisan. We still want to do this. And now that you're in leadership, you have more opportunities to work together with Republicans. Here's some good Republicans with whom you can start the conversation on the Climate Solutions Caucus. Make the climate a bridge issue, not a wedge issue. Introduce, co-sponsor, and ultimately pass bipartisan legislation that reduces our emissions or helps us adapt to the changes climate has and will bring. So for this one, what I have in mind is the 15 or so bills that the chairman of the Climate Solutions Caucus identified and shared within the caucus. The liaisons for members of the Climate Solutions Caucus have already been working this hard. So I've been having conversations with Democrat and Republican liaisons on the Climate Solutions Caucus. They have a sheet. They've been sharing it with the members of Congress on the caucus. They've been saying, we want you to co-sponsor this. And the outcome is that 2 of those bills have now become the law of the land. And so HR 1090, it was, I think it was orphaned tax credits for some renewable energy technologies. That was one that the caucus, we got people co-sponsored for, and then I can't remember the bill number, but it resulted in the extension of 45Q tax credit for carbon capture and sequestration. So that is a manifestation of what the caucus is about, sharing relevant bills, talking to people who are interested, making sure everybody's aware of things that are on the same page, and getting co-sponsorships. That's how you show support within Congress. Number 3, join or form bipartisan working groups, such as the Climate Solutions Caucus in the House, that create an active space for respectful inter-party dialogue on this topic. Again, a democracy where people who disagree with each other cannot have respectful conversations is in trouble. And places for this respectful dialogue are worth preserving in and of their own right. If we can't protect those spaces for bipartisan dialogue, then what are we doing here? That's a big problem. And so also I know a lot of you have been asking your senators for years now to form something like the Climate Solutions Caucus. They've been resistant to that. They kind of look down their noses at the House, who have to run for Congress every 2 years, and they say, oh, we don't do caucuses in the Senate. We don't need to. There's so few of us in our Senate clique that we're on so many committees with each other, we talk to each other anyway, so we don't do caucuses. So they've been resistant to that. Calling it a working group might help let up on that, and I tried to make this in a way so that they can be a little bit more creative in the way. The main message is here. We want you having respectful dialogues on a regular basis with members of Congress who are on the other side of you on this issue. We want this to be a bridge, not a wedge. Hold hearings on the topic of policy solutions to our changing climate rather than on the settled science of the problem. Here, a couple of things. Number one, again, I have in mind Democrats who are going to be leading committees, some of which have Republicans on the Climate Solutions Caucus. And so this is an opportunity for those Republicans on the climate solutions, if they can make this a bridge issue, not a wedge issue, if they're trying to schedule hearings that provide opportunities for elite cues so that Republicans can get on board, they can say things that they like, if they're not trying to trap their political opponents, if they're trying to form legislation that matters with their political partners, then I think that's how we can move things forward. So this is where I think bridge versus wedge has the most bite. We want those hearings to be in the space where you can have even James Inhofe on the Senate saying, I like wind power in Oklahoma. That's something that I can get on board with. And that's going to be an opportunity for some of his colleagues who are further along in climate. I want wind power in my state, and I want it because, this is a Republican speaking, because of the impacts climate is having on my state. Does that paint a picture for what I'm talking about? That is what bridge, not wedge means. So you have these opportunities where they can have these discussions, and so you're not trying to trap them, you're trying to build with them, you're taking what you can get and giving the opportunity for the Republicans who are out there, you got them out there, to send those elite cues. That's how we're going to change the hearts and minds of the Republican base. And then this last one, schedule bipartisan briefings with members of your state or region that focus on local impacts and highlight experts from your district, state, or region. And I have in mind here the great briefings that the DC office, in particular Andres Jimenez, helped organize around the Olympic athletes who came. That was a bipartisan briefing hosted by a Democrat and Republican. We had Olympians sometimes from their own state, talking about how changing climate was affecting their sport. It was a great event for them. It was a bipartisan event. It was something that we were able to get a lot of media on. It made CCL look really good. It made the climate look like a bipartisan issue. There was also a really great one, Senators Nelson and Rubio, Democrat and Republican out of Florida, on the red tide. That happened recently, same thing. They were able to take experts from their state or their region, talk about how this is impacting them. And members of Congress always want to highlight wonderful, exceptional people from their district or from their state. So this one, with the briefings, there's a lot more room for creativity. The hearings, those are part of the congressional record. There's a little bit less room for creativity. On the briefings, there's more room for creativity, so you can pique their interest. So these are ways that we think that they can demonstrate this spirit of bridge, not wedge. And then the last thing is success. Over the last 11 years, Citizens Climate Lobby has grown to include over 100,000 committed volunteers by emphasizing our values of appreciation and respect. We have shown that these are principles around which you can build a movement. We ask you to embrace these values as well, and in particular on the challenge of climate change. This is an issue we can no longer afford to ignore. Here, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to say, look, people have been telling us throughout that CCL needs to be different. We can't be this nice. We need to play hardball. We need to do all these things. No, we have built a movement. We have filled this room from 24 people to over 600. And this is our off one. This is our small conference. And we have over 100,000 people on every continent. These are values that reflect the research that America wants to see bipartisanship. It wants to see respect. It wants to see people who can get along while disagreeing. That's what we want to see. And I'm going to stop for questions at the moment on that round of applause. What we're going to do is we have cards, and so our interns have note cards. If you could pass those around, people are raising their hands. We're going to take those note cards. But in the meantime, Brian, why don't you stand up? I'll repeat your question until I start getting note cards.
Thanks, Danny. Can you respond to the criticism?
I'm going to repeat his question.
Can you respond to the criticism we often hear about the Climate Solution Caucus not doing very much to the left?
Brian's question is, can you respond to, that's mine. Oh, okay, thank you. Can you respond to criticisms of the Climate Solutions Caucus not doing enough? I think that there is, what I like to say is, envision a situation. You want to pass legislation that is a match for the scale of the problem. You need 60 votes in the Senate. Is it easier or is it harder to get those 60 votes if there is already a place where Democrats and Republicans are talking to each other respectfully on topic? For me, there's no hesitation. It's easier if that space exists. So if you are a true climate advocate, then you should be protecting the caucus as a space where these dialogues already exist and where they can continue to exist, because if we're actually going to solve this, we're going to be able to solve it quicker if we don't have to reinvent that wheel. If we can create a space where all the bickering, all the partisanship doesn't ring as loudly in our ears. So to me, that's the biggest pushback on why we need the caucus. Do we have cards ready yet? I think I'm looking for Stephanie.
Yes. Can
Okay.
you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So the first one we have is, what is the primary ask?
The primary ask is we want you to make climate a bridge issue, not a wedge issue. We want you to make climate a bridge issue, not a wedge issue. We want you to do the work that CCL does every day of finding something we appreciate and respect about people we disagree with. And after that, we want you to take this issue, climate, and use it to achieve all these benefits that are in our ask. You're going to be responding to your constituents about the way our democracy functions. And you're going to be reaping some real electoral benefits in that you're going to be more electable if you have something you can point to and say, this is where I can work with members of the other party. That's our ask. Next question.
What can we say about Curbello's bill?
With the Market Choice Act, so that had 3 co-sponsors. It had Curbello, it had Fitzpatrick, and those were original co-sponsors. A couple of days later, Francis Rooney joined as a co-sponsor. It had 3 Republican co-sponsors. I think that what we can say about that bill is in our, I'm going to talk about this tonight, but it is in the salmon, it is not in the salmon letter, the salmon paper, which is in your folder. It should have been, that is on me, I apologize. It is in the downloadable document that is on our website. So if you go onto CCL Community, you look up legislation of interest, you can download a document that is the same as the one you have in your folders, except it does have the Market Choice Act. It has our official take on there, but our official take is that it is very significant to have Republicans, for the first time in 9 years, talking about pricing carbon. Listening to the scientific consensus that pricing carbon is the best first step to addressing climate change. Theirs is a novel approach, which has some important differences from the CCL approach. We would like to see a higher rate of increase, a greater assurance that low-income households are actually going to get enough money to make them whole, and we would prefer to ignore regulations, since if you have a carbon price that is high enough as ours is. So that would be our general take on that. Next question.
Nancy Pelosi has pledged to establish a House Committee on Climate Change. How will members be chosen, and how does this differ from the caucus?
It's different from the caucus because members will be chosen by the leadership of each party. And so Republican members of the Climate Solutions Caucus, Democratic members of the Climate Solutions Caucus, they can request to be on there. But there's a very good bet that you're going to have some straight-up climate deniers on the Republican side. And if you're talking about the science and not about the solutions, then that is a gateway to the same stale debate we've been having for the last 30 years. And again, stalemate is victory for climate deniers. So I think that the caucus is going to remain necessary because that is a place where people want to be on there. They are interested in solutions. You don't have anybody looking to torpedo that process. With this select committee, I think that if they embrace bridge, not wedge, I think that could be very significant. It's another opportunity for Republicans to show elite cues, for Democrats to show elite cues to their bases, but I think that there is hazard. So I think that if we can get through bridge, not wedge, I think it could be great. If we fail to get it through, I think that it could be detrimental.
Does the caucus stop growing now due to the need for regrowth or regaining the lost 25 Republicans? And how likely is it that we can find those 25?
There are 34 new Republicans coming in, at least, into this new Congress. And traditionally, Republicans and Democrats who are new to Congress have been more interested in joining the caucus. So we have 34 new targets to invite to join the Climate Solutions Caucus. I do have an interest in growing it. I like being able to say there's more Republicans on the Climate Solutions Caucus than on the Freedom Caucus. I just like saying it. And so I would like to, again, be able to say that. So I have an interest in growing it, but Congressman Deutsch, I know, has expressed an interest in having more of a test, at least one potential Republican to replace Carlos Curbelo. Francis Rooney has also expressed in the media an interest in having a bit of a higher bar, but regardless, that is up to the members. CCL's primary role, I think, is to bring people to the party, and we look forward to working with them to continue to make the caucus more significant and more impactful.
Is there a best way to respectfully convey impatience in a Congress member's years of inaction?
I think that depends on the congressman or the congresswoman, and I think it depends on your personality. I think that probably the best way is through personal stories, because they can't say you're wrong about your personal experience. You lived your experience. That is your truth. And if you spend a lot of time rehearsing and getting down to 2 minutes or less, your personal climate story, why this matters to you, why are you here? You all have a climate story. That, I think, is going to be the most effective way to communicate the urgency. If you cry, great, bonus points. If you make them cry, I will buy you a drink. Next question.
Do we have a different approach when we speak to a lame duck?
So with lame duck, this is one of the challenges of going into this Congress at this time. And it is a time of transition. And we chose this time not to make our lives harder, even though it does, but because times of transition, while they are hard, they are also great opportunities. This is a time at which you are going to be there, literally, for a lot of members of Congress, literally the first constituents they meet with are going to be the people in this room. The first people. This is going to be the first time back, and this is after a midterm election. There was a majority flipped. They're going to be, both parties are going to be trying to figure out what the heck are we doing next Congress. And I think that is a great opportunity to make sure you tomorrow are going to make sure that climate is in their wheelhouse. It is top of mind as they try and figure it out. And not just climate, but climate as a bridge issue, not a wedge issue. This is the time when members of Congress are most open to suggestion. And so this is a difficult time to navigate, but it's the perfect time for us to be going in. Now, to the actual question, for people who are leaving, there's a couple of options. I'll break it into 3 categories. For Republicans on the Climate Solutions Caucus who are leaving, I would ask them to find someone, a Republican, who will replace them, a Republican who's coming back who will take their spot on the Climate Solutions Caucus. For Republicans who are leaving who are not on the Climate Solutions Caucus, I think it depends if you're talking with a member or you're talking with an aide. The aide might very well still be there. And so I would still have the conversation of make climate a bridge issue, not a wedge issue, and talk about how do you see, wherever you're going, how do you see this working for you in that new space? How do you see your party? How could they manifest this? How could they work this? I saw, reading the June notes, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes, I saw a lot of examples of that bridge, not wedge concept totally transforming a conversation. We got asked by a Democratic Senate office and a Republican Senate office if they could quote us on that. And so this is something that members of Congress, they saw it and it moved conversations in a positive direction. I wouldn't have made this our primary ask if I didn't feel confident that it would work for you. And so I think that with Republicans who are leaving, who are not in the caucus, talking to them, talking to the staffer about how they can manifest this moving on. And I think the same actually goes for Democrats who are, there's only just a few Democrats who are leaving the caucus. I don't think anybody on the caucus was not reelected. I think they're leaving by choice. And so for Democrats who are not coming back, again, in your next career, in your next step, how do you manifest? Have a listening conversation where you engage with this idea on them on a broader scale, because again, this is not just about Congress, this is about our society. CCL is we are standing up against the currents of our society. This appreciation and respect is countercultural. And so how do they manifest this countercultural appreciation and respect in politics in whatever they're doing on this issue? I think that's going to be a fruitful discussion regardless.
When we're talking to a Democrat, how do we get them to support a bipartisan bill? Does that mean they should not introduce?
Yeah. We want Democrats to hold off on introducing until they've got a Republican lined up. And we have some Republicans who have stood up. You've got Brian Fitzpatrick and you've got Francis Rooney who are coming back. And so I think, and again, there are 20 Republicans who are on the Climate Solutions Caucus who are coming back. Now let me state this again, because I can't state this enough. The Climate Solutions Caucus does not exist to pass carbon fee and dividend. Climate Solutions Caucus does not exist to pass carbon fee and dividend. But if you're looking for a place where you can have Republicans who might be interested in that discussion, that's a good place to start. I think of it as, pulling back on my oceanography background, as a marine protected area. Marine protected areas are large swaths of the ocean where there is no catching. You can't catch anything. And what that enables, it enables the fish, lobsters, whatever, to grow to large size. Females of species in the ocean, they can produce more eggs. So you have one female who is very mature, they can produce 100,000 larvae instead of, say, 100, as if they're smaller. And what this does is this seeds the areas outside of the marine protected area, and you have higher catches and you have a more robust environment. And so the Climate Solutions Caucus is like a marine protected area. It is not about carbon fee and dividend, but you're going to have people that wander outside of the caucus and you can catch them. So.
How should we answer, looks like being good on climate was bad for Republicans?
I don't see data for that. I don't see data for that because Carlos Curbelo lost, but he was in a D+16 district. Hillary won his district by 16 points. The only reason he was competitive at all was because of his leadership on climate. I don't see evidence for that because Brian Fitzpatrick was in a fight. He was on a carbon tax bill and he won. I don't see evidence for that because if you look at Mark Sanford, the member of the Freedom Caucus who was on the Climate Solutions Caucus, he got primaried from the right, and now a Democrat holds his seat. And so in that case, I would say that by Republicans refusing to acknowledge that he knew his district better than they did, and that climate was important for his district by saying, no, we know better, you got to hold the party line, they lost that seat to a Democrat. And so I see zero data to support that assertion.
How should we address comments or questions from Democratic staff supporting climate regulations, like the Clean Power Plan?
That's great. And we should have something that is bigger, that really gives us a shot at what the Ipcc has told us we need to do. We need carbon prices. Carbon prices are the best first step. Regulations are great. Thank you for doing that. We need to go further. The climate demands it.
How does state level carbon fee or other types of legislation get in the way or support national legislation?
I think it supports it because it provides, I'm going to say this again, this is too many times in too short a time, data. It provides data points. If you have these examples, these positive examples, like British Columbia, for example, where you reduce emissions, where you may actually see jobs grow, the economy beats other provinces in Canada, and it actually gains support for the party that introduces it. I want more examples like that. I think that if you have a revenue-neutral carbon fee, that's what's going to happen. And so I think that one of the most exciting things about Canada is if those fee and dividend proposals are come into effect and we start getting data from those, I think that's going to provide very compelling information and support for acting on the state level and on the federal level here in the United States. And Steph, this will be the last question, and then I'll start talking about the June analysis.
So this one, there's a few about the Ipcc and the price that they put in it as far as what a carbon tax should be, and is our price too low?
Rick Knight is going to talk all about this. The answer is no, it is not too low. And so you'll have to come back after dinner and hear Rick Knight, but the very short answer is no, it is not too low. All right, so could I get the slides back up, please? So the June analysis, how I envision you using this. This is so what this is I want this to be something that you craft to your member. I want you to use this how you see fit to move your relationship forward. And so it is not meant to be read in sequence from top to bottom. You don't have to go after every data point. You just have to pick the ones that you find are most exciting. And so this one also has 3 parts. It's got the top topics, it's got a deep dive into what I did, and it talks about who we're meeting with. And so how did I do this? Well, okay, so there was a centralization and simplification step. There was a helpful reading, category determination and counting, and then there was analysis. And I want to say thank you on the centralization and simplification to all of you for getting your notes in such a timely fashion. You guys get those notes in like this. And thank you to Amy for making it so easy for you to do that. Thank you to Amy for reminding those of you who are a little bit late that you do need to get those in. Thank you to Tony Cerna for gathering those into a spreadsheet for me. And thank you to my intern and fellow over the summer, Jack Baker and Paulina Santos Lopez, who helped me cut out the stuff that I'm not interested in reading, stuff that may be important for you in building a relationship, for example, where the staff you're meeting with went to college. I don't care. But it is important for you, so I'm glad it's in there. I have them take stuff like that out. So what is some notes of caution? I always like to provide these. The notes that you give me, they're getting much better through the years, but they were variable in their content and duration. Some of you had 5-minute meetings, some of you had 50-minute meetings. So it's not like we're taking a survey here. So we're comparing, there's some differences. So the quality of notes was variable, although much improved. I did a word count, and average words that I was reading, it's gone up each of the last 3 years. I think it was up 13% from last year, so it's more words for me, but you guys, it's 13% more good stuff. You're getting really good at capturing the essence of stuff that's going in this meeting, so you guys are getting much better. There is no review. I am the only one who read these. And so I am training Allison and Taylor to help me read through these notes. We're going to do it on the notes from this one, but for these data, it was just one person. And this isn't actually what I got my PhD in. I was not formally trained in this. I just figured it out. So top topics. So this is the table that's on the first page, and you have it in your folder. The most common topic areas raised by Congress were the Climate Solutions Caucus, or the CSC, the Dividend, agriculture, jobs, endorsers, and local climate impacts. And so some other information I'm going to give you for the Climate Solutions Caucus, that was most frequently brought up as an interest. So not only do I track 72 topics and how frequently they come up, I track were they brought up as a concern by the office, a question by the office, a suggested focus by the office, an interest, or something else. And usually something else is just a statement of fact. And so for the Climate Solutions Caucus, overwhelmingly, it was an interest. And what I take away from that is I don't care about people who are criticizing the caucus outside because it's unambiguous. This came up in 50% of the notes. This is good for your relationships. CCL exists for 2 things, and number 2 is to help you experience breakthroughs in exercising your personal and political power. The caucus has, like no other thing, enabled you to do that. And so from an institutional perspective, it makes 100% sense to do that. It was, I think, 158 mentions as an interest and something like 13 as a concern. So Congress is interested in this as well. Number 2, dividend, that was most frequently brought up as a question. So they're asking questions, most frequently they're asking questions about how to administer it. And so actually, there we go. And so agriculture was most frequently brought up as a statement of fact, and I think that was because the Farm Bill was out, so they're saying we're dealing with agriculture. Jobs, interestingly, actually fell 8% in mentions from last year, possibly because unemployment is at record lows, but even with that, it's still a top 5 topic, and that tells you just how much members of Congress care about jobs. Endorsers is a top 5 topic, but it actually came up 1 fewer time than last year. And that's because you had other topics that were ahead of it, the Climate Leadership Council, the Paris Agreement, and then there was one other, which I'm blanking on. It's in my notes. And the border adjustment were ahead of endorsers last time. They are less interesting, for whatever reason, in June. And then local impacts. So I told you what is the most impactful way to have a conversation with somebody. Tell a personal story. Talk about how you're being impacted in the district. Members of Congress are listening. This is most frequently brought up as a concern. Both Republicans and Democrats are seeing that more constituents are being affected by this, and they're picking up on it. I only tracked anything if it was clear that the staff substantively picked up on it. If you brought it up but they didn't pick up on it, I didn't track it. It was only if it was clear from your notes, what you wrote down, that they had something to say about that. So Climate Solutions Caucus, these next 6 statements are something that stand on their own, stand by themselves, but they also enable you to pick up off them and to take this wherever you want. And so the Climate Solutions Caucus, we're excited about the widespread bipartisan interest in the Climate Solutions Caucus. In our view, it's easier for Congress to pass meaningful climate legislation if there are places where respectful dialogue between the parties on the topic is taking place. The caucus is such a place. So that enables you to jump off into bridge, not wedge. Dividend, offices were typically asking questions about dividend administration. CCL has a study on this available on our website that also accounts for the impact of recent tax reform legislation. So not only do we have this study, but it accounts for changes which might affect it, because we're just that good, would have on administering dividend. And almost every question I ever get in the notes is answered by that dividend delivery study. It's all in there. It's long, it's hard to read, but it's in there. Agriculture, so again, the Farm Bill is up for reauthorization, and our volunteers have many fruitful discussions about the role farmers could play in solving our climate crisis. We have an excellent agricultural action team, and they do a lot of great work. And so if that is of interest to you, I do think that this was anomalously high because of the 5-year authorization of the Farm Bill. But if this is of interest to you, it's an opportunity for you to move on this to pull from the great resources that our ag team has already identified and bring those into your meeting, should you choose. Jobs, it's always important. Carbon fee and dividends projected to create 2.8 million jobs in 20 years. The largest sectors of job growth include healthcare, retail, accommodation, and food services, and construction. Those other issues are there because they are not expected. People are expecting all the jobs to come in green energy, in energy efficiency. That's not it. It's in healthcare. You give somebody a dividend, a low-income mother is going to spend that on taking her child to the doctor. That's a good thing. If you have a dividend, people are going to spend it on, they're going to go to the store, they're going to go out to food, they're going to get their dividend, they're going to go out for a meal with their family, and it's going to result in construction. These are non-obvious things, and the REMI study is a great source to mine to have those conversations. Pick a job that is important for your district or state. Endorsers. CCL exists to create political will, and that involves lining up support for our policy and district. We've been busy doing that, and we value Congress's input on who we should be talking to. This is a great opportunity for you to drop down the endorsement letters that Todd is so diligently helping you organize out there, to bring our national endorsements, to bring other endorsements from your district or state. This is a cue for you to take this conversation where you want, to highlight the good work that you've been doing, and to accept CCL understands this is hard, and we're going to do it anyway. Local impacts. More and more Americans are saying they're feeling the impacts of climate change themselves. They're telling their members of Congress, and members of Congress are noticing. This would be a great place to reflect back onto the ask sheet and say, might you have a briefing on local impacts? You could hire some professors from a university in our state, in our district. And who do you think you could have across the aisle who could co-host that with you? It was a great media opportunity for Senators Nelson and Rubio when they had a red tide briefing and highlighted experts from Florida. And so then the second section, this replaces the tiers. And so I'll show you what the tiers were last year, but I thought that this was a bit more fresh. We do hear this pushback on the caucus, and so I thought, well, let's show them something else. And so the green arrows point to the different columns that are abbreviations. They're defined. On the left, COJ is Committees of Jurisdiction, WM is Ways and Means, EC is Energy and Commerce, FIN is Finance, EPW, Environment and Public Works, ENR, Energy and Natural Resources. And this is These are beautiful data points. This is where I feel like all the hard work that, the months of time I spend reading and beating my head against these notes, this is the best part of that. And so the way you can use this is you can go, if you look at that third row right down there, ag. Gosh darn it. If you look at that third row, ag, you can point to the column over there, the House, and that came up in only 12% of meetings. And then you can go to the next column over, 20% of senators brought it up. Well, that makes sense because the Senate does have a lot more representation from agricultural states. So here you can see something we know about the structure of our democracy. It's reflected in the notes. And then you can go into jobs, and you can focus on Ways and Means, WM there, and E&C, Energy and Commerce. For some reason, the members on Energy and Commerce, they're bringing up jobs in 1 out of 5 meetings, whereas on Ways and Means, it's only coming up in 1 out of 20. Isn't that interesting? And so you can go and looking down at endorsers. The Finance Committee is really interested in endorsers. Isn't that weird? And so you can go down this and you can say, look at this. And here is where you hammer home how unique CCL is. Nobody has this except us. Nobody can have this. Nobody has 507 meetings in a day. Nobody. Even if they did, they're certainly not going to read all those notes and then summarize them and put them into beautiful tables. And it is a mark of a true nonpartisan organization that we share this with everybody. We want everybody to have this information. We will talk to everybody. We're going to give everybody the same advantage of seeing these data. So really hammer on this. Feel free to ask some questions. Does anybody else bring you stuff like that? What do you notice about this? What are some interesting things that you notice? Their minds will be blown. And so I want you to have that experience of blowing your staffer's mind, because they're going to associate you with being smart. They're going to associate you with an organization who knows what it's talking about and can deliver something that nobody else can deliver. This is our competitive advantage. Use it. Push it. Wedge it? Bridge it, yes. So the third point, who do we meet with? In June of 2018, 507 CCL meetings in a day. A representative or senator was present in 16% of those meetings. This compares to our average for 2014 to 2016, that was 8 to 10%. I left out 2017 because the number was actually higher. But the take home here is that what happened in 2017 was the caucus happened. And so once the caucus became bigger, members of Congress were showing up. They saw that you guys mattered. You can make a difference in their political career. And when I say it's unambiguous to me that the caucus is good for empowering our volunteers, this is what I'm talking about. And you can say, the last line there is that we had a face-to-face meeting with senators in approximately 30% of meetings in the committees of jurisdiction, which is true. It's 28% in finance, 33% in environment and public works, and 29% in energy and natural resources. 1 out of 3 times you guys in June shook hands with a senator in those meetings. That's remarkable. And so this is the table that I know a lot of you are very familiar with. You can feel free to bring this up if you want, but the salient number is that one in the final, the rightmost column, the ratio. In this year, in 2018, there were 28 Tier 1 meetings for every 1 Tier 3 meeting. Now, a Tier 1 meeting is where you're able to have a good discussion with a Republican office for every 1 Tier 3 meeting. A Tier 3 meeting is where it's clear from the notes they don't really want us there. Not really. They don't want us there. There's some hostility there. And you can see from 2014 to 2015, 16, 17, 18, the CCL methodology works. So you can feel free to cite this, but I did want to switch it up.